Hello, I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching I24 News. We begin in the region, and more violence has erupted at the contested Temple Mount in Jerusalem, with a firebomb thrown at police, sending an officer to hospital to be treated for smoke inhalation. Now, at least 3 people have been arrested in relation to this latest incident, which is a flashpoint and has seen an uptick of violence lately, with several violent confrontations between Muslim worshippers and police. Now, following today's incident, the Temple Mount has been closed, with additional security forces brought to the holy site to try and bring that situation under control. The entry from Damascus Gate, from Jerusalem's Old City, has also been closed as a result. And let's go now to our correspondent Daniel Semak, who is standing by in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount there. Daniel, we're seeing behind you a lot of chaos. There's a lot of noise going on. Tell us, what is the very latest there and what spurred all of this on?
Well, Sarah, we arrived here in the Old City of Jerusalem over an hour ago, and the scene was actually relatively calm. There was a huge group of Muslim worshippers waiting outside on one of the gates of the Old City as the Old City was closed off. After around an hour, they started to try and push in, and the police decided to push them away, and then they broke off here to one of the intersections near the Old City, and they started running up the street here behind us. Now the police have actually pushed the biggest crowd of the Muslim worshippers and the Palestinian residents all the way up to the main street. This was after already several people were arrested and stopped. There were physical altercations that broke out. Definitely a very chaotic situation in the last half hour or so, Sarah.
Okay, and Daniel, as we know, they have closed access to the Temple Mount, and there are still massive protests going on. So tell us, what sort of an escalation can we expect there?
Well, for now, Sarah, we are seeing a slight escalation. As I said, when we arrived, it was calm, but it was tense. And that's really the situation that's been the case here on the ground for the past several weeks. Even the calm is really undercoated with strong tension. And at any moment, that can really change. The second somebody starts chanting, or the second that a police feels as though they're coming under threat, things can change really at the drop of a hat. And that's what we saw earlier, is that just after things seemed calm, they started chanting, and they started maybe moving a little bit closer to the Old City itself. Now, it's important to mention here that access was restricted to Palestinians that are not residents of the Old City. Israeli Arabs are not residents of the Old City, weren't allowed access, but tourists and press like ourselves were allowed inside. When we went inside the Old City, it was very quiet. The streets were quite empty, actually, and that's majorly because most of the people are being kept out because of the violence that broke out earlier in today, which is just important to remind our viewers. There was a Molotov cocktail thrown on the Temple Mount compound towards a police post, and after that the security situation changed. They started closing off the access routes, they started closing off the Old City entirely, and now the police are really trying to make sure that this situation doesn't get out of hand, but it's definitely a very dynamic situation right now, Sarah.
It certainly is. Daniel Semak in East Jerusalem, thank you for that update, and we will continue to stay with Daniel throughout the night to see what is happening there. Now, let's stay in the region, where a high-level meeting has taken place overnight between the head of the Israeli security force, known as the Shin Bet, and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas inside Abbas's home. Now, that meeting between Nadav Argaman and Abbas coming at a particularly tense time between Israel and the Palestinians, with, as we mentioned a little earlier, the continued clashes at Jerusalem's contested Temple Mount, along with concern over the US's so-called deal of the century peace plan, which is expected to be presented after the Israeli elections on April 9. And for more on this story, let's now go to our senior Middle East correspondent, Mohammed Al-Qasim, who is on the phone. Mohammed, thanks for being with us. Firstly, what more do we know about this very secretive meeting which took place overnight?
That's correct, Sarah. Top secret meeting that was not officially recognized by either administration, whether from the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, or even from the Israeli government. A number of issues were discussed in the meeting that took place last night at President Mahmoud Abbas's residence in the West Bank city of Ramallah. Among them, the heightened tension in Jerusalem, as well as the situation in the Gaza Strip, and also They talked about what would, the security coordination, something that President Abbas has always said that he will continue to respect. So this is something that is very interesting, and the head of the Israeli security, for him to travel to the city of Ramallah and meet face-to-face with President Abbas means that there are a number of important issues that he had to discuss directly with President Abbas, especially now that we have a new Palestinian prime minister that has been appointed and is going to be forming his government soon. So that goes to show you how important the security coordination between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority is.
Yes, it certainly is, Mohammed. Tell us a little more about the timing of this top-level meeting, especially considering the Israeli elections are just around the corner, slated for April 9.
Absolutely, and I think that the timing is extremely important and significant. Again, we have in less than 4 weeks going to have the Israeli elections. That's important in terms of security, as well as, again, the heightened tension in Jerusalem around the Haram al-Sharif compound is something that President Abbas needed to discuss with the head of Israeli intelligence, as well as, again, the situation in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority and President Abbas aren't happy with the way things are going there, and they do believe that Israel has contributed to the division and between the Palestinian factions that are unhappy with Israel allowing money coming from Qatar to enter into Gaza. They believe this act and these steps will continue the division among the Palestinians. So definitely the timing is important, especially with everything else that is going on.
Okay, Senior Middle East Correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim, thank you so much for that update. Meanwhile, there's been a stabbing attempt in Hebron in the West Bank. Now, the Israeli Defense Forces is confirming that a man who tried to stab soldiers a short while ago has been killed by Israeli soldiers. Residents in the Jewish settlement of Kiryat Arba reported that a man was earlier seen walking around armed with a knife. The army says investigations into the incident are already underway. This as a video has been published showing Israeli soldiers laughing as they bash Palestinian prisoners who were cuffed and blindfolded. The footage you're about to see is being used as a major part of evidence in the trial against 5 ultra-Orthodox troops who've been given suspended jail time and a demotion as part of a plea deal. Now, the Palestinian men in the video are a father and son who are suspected of helping a terrorist who killed 2 of the soldiers' comrades in a shooting attack the previous month. Meanwhile, in a speech commemorating former Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, Prime Minister Netanyahu has revealed that his government is in contact with 6 Arab states which were previously aggressive toward Israel. Netanyahu coming out with the news just a short while ago. Let's take a listen.
Only when our neighbors are convinced that our strength and presence here are absolute facts, only then some of them will be convinced to make peace with us. And we are advancing this process of recognition and agreement with the rest of our neighbors, not with all of them, but with most of them. We are doing this with large parts of the Arab and Muslim world in an accelerated process of normalization, which the public sees only a part of. We are also carrying out this process secretly, and Israel is currently in contact with half a dozen important Arab and Muslim countries, which until recently were hostile to Israel.
Meanwhile, the leader of the newly formed Blue and White Party, former IDF chief Benny Gantz, has met with European Union's ambassadors today to give them a briefing on his stance on Israel-EU relations, along with issues surrounding Israel's security. A person who was also in attendance has told publication The Times of Israel that, quote, Gantz does not explicitly endorse a 2-state solution, but is indicating that both Israelis and Palestinians are here to stay, adding that an arrangement needs to be found. And when talking about the controversial nation-state law, Gantz has reportedly told the ambassadors that, obviously, Israel is a state for all of its citizens. This after Netanyahu said earlier this week that Israel is not a state of all its citizens, but the nation-state of the Jewish people. And we're going out for a short break. Stay with us.
Stories, Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all.
Unflinching, opinionated, weeknights David Schuster and Tal Heinrich bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Nurit Ben.
And I'm Kalev Ben David.
Join us right here on The Rundown for the global headlines defining the day.
Plus in-depth interviews and debates that take you inside the Middle East.
To the stories born out of this region and the massive impact they have all the way to Washington.
The Rundown on I-24 News.
Where the Middle East meets the world.
There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, perspectives. There's more than just one view.
Thanks for staying with us. Let's now go to the UK, where opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn is urging Parliament members to vote against Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit agreement. This despite claims from May that she's made a breakthrough in negotiations after she and Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay held talks with the European Union in Strasbourg late on Monday. Those changes do not affect the terms of the divorce deal, but offer legal assurances to back it up. Now, this is Britain's top attorney, Geoffrey Cox, says lawmakers need to make a political judgment on if they're prepared to accept May's assurances surrounding the controversial deal. And for more on Brexit, let's now go live to London, where our correspondent Jonathan Sacerdoti is standing by. Jonathan, thank you. We know that Theresa May was in Strasbourg late last night negotiating, and she announced she had managed to improve the Brexit deal, but it doesn't really look like she can even get this new deal through a parliamentary vote. So tell us, Jonathan, what exactly went wrong?
Well, Sarah, that's right. Theresa May was in Strasbourg trying to renegotiate down to the very last minute, knowing that she would have that so-called meaningful vote today in Parliament. What she came back with was what she announced last night, some reassurances as to the permanence or otherwise of the so-called backstop. Remember, the backstop is what is meant to prevent there being a hard border between Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, which is not part of the United Kingdom and will remain part of the European Union. That will be the only land border between the UK and the European Union, and thus it has proved to be a sticking point. People in the UK, especially those who are on the side of leaving the European Union, have been adamant that the backstop, the insurance process that had been negotiated, was one that could potentially trap the UK permanently within the customs union should the two sides not be able to come to a trade agreement in the future. And they have been pushing Theresa May to renegotiate that. She came back with what she said were legally justified reassurances that that was impossible. But the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, himself said that it did not change the possibility that the UK could be arbitrarily and permanently trapped within the EU. And that's why it looks like she may well lose today.
And Jonathan, Jean-Claude Juncker said last night that the EU had given the UK a second chance and renegotiated, but there would be no third chance if the UK doesn't agree to the deal. So tell us, Jonathan, what happens next?
Again, a very good question and not one that many people are able to answer. There are so many unknowns here. This is uncharted territory politically. So what could happen if Theresa May loses that vote on the deal today is that there will be a vote tomorrow, she has said, which will be on whether or not Britain should rule out the possibility of leaving the EU with no deal. She won't have managed to put her deal through, the one she's agreed with Juncker, but then she may be giving the possibility to the House that they will rule out leaving with no deal. And then the following day, there'll be another vote on whether to ask for an extension to the deadline of the end of this month. And of course, if they rule out no deal but don't ask for the extension, that leaves Britain in an absolutely impossible situation. So all of these votes could trigger off something far worse. It could be a stalemate that is more intractable than the current one that Britain is in, and that's something that certainly seems unthinkable at this moment.
And Jonathan, just fairly briefly, tell us, what does all of this mean for Mrs May's future as Prime Minister and also the government? They're keeping power.
Well, Mrs May has not only to get this through the vote today, but should this get through, which looks very unlikely, she's then got to negotiate with the EU a trade deal for the future relationship between the two sides, the EU and the UK. Many don't have faith in her doing that because they don't have faith in her getting this through today. And certainly if that stalemate I described to you a moment ago does come to be, that means that the government itself is unable to put legislation through on the most important issue of the day, leaving many things uncertain and unsafe in the country.
OK, Jonathan, and of course this is all ongoing and you will continue to update us throughout the evening. Thank you so much for your time, Jonathan Sashidoti there. Moving on, and the man responsible for a deadly attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels has been sentenced to life in prison. Now, this comes as Belgium and other European nations are hoping to stop their citizens who joined ISIS return home now that the war in Syria is over. Defence correspondent Jonathan Regev has the story.
Mehdi Nemouche is the man who sent Western Europe the wake-up call it ignored for a long time. The French terrorist who carried out the attack at the Jewish Museum in Brussels in May of 2014, killing 4 people, was the first Western European to fight for the Islamic State and then come to carry attacks in Europe. On Tuesday morning, he was sentenced to life in jail.
The Belgian nation has clearly given a salutary message via its jury to all future potential terrorists, if there were to be some more, and to all those who would be ready to give them whatever help. The message is very clear.
While Nemouche will spend the rest of his life behind bars, the problem of ISIS is here to stay. The extremist Islamist organization lost its caliphate in Syria and Iraq. That means thousands of Europeans who joined its ranks are now heading back home, posing a major challenge for the countries they originally came from.
I think this is one of the major challenges ahead of us, Europeans, and to put obstacles on the way in order to avoid them coming back to Europe. This has to be a challenge.
This may, however, prove to be easier said than done. European citizens who joined the ranks of IS are taking their cases to court, asking for their home countries to take them back.
We are really no danger for Belgium, and I want the people to understand this and, like I said, to make the balance.
We also understand that they are afraid and that they have bad feelings against us.
Belgium has for now decided it will take back young children born to Belgian citizens who joined IS but will not repatriate their parents. Many of them are being held by US-backed forces in Syria. With the upcoming withdrawal of the American forces from the area, pressure is already growing on European nations to solve the problem of their citizens. The last thing they want is to take home more militants like Mehdi Nemouche. Jonathan Regev, I24 News.
Let's move now to Sunday's deadly plane crash in Ethiopia, and several countries, including the UK, Germany, France, China, South Korea, Australia, Singapore and Indonesia, have grounded their Boeing planes. The Ethiopian Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashed 6 minutes into its flight from Addis Ababa to Nairobi, killing all 157 people on board. Now, Ethiopia observed a national day of mourning on Monday. American regulators have ordered Boeing to make urgent improvements to its best-selling jet, but they're ruling out grounding the fleet as investigators analyse the black box flight recorders from the wreckage. Meanwhile, international forensic experts, including from here in Israel, are on the ground at the crash site as they try to come to a conclusion as to just what went wrong. They're working as part of a global team to look into the tragedy which killed all 157 passengers and crew on board. Among the dead, 8 Americans and 2 Israelis. Let's go now to the US, and Acting Budget Director Russell Vought is about to testify before the House Budget Committee on Donald Trump's proposed 2020 budget. The president sent Congress a record $4.75 trillion budget plan on Monday, calling for increased military spending and sharp cuts to domestic programs like education and healthcare for the elderly and the poor. His budget is the largest in federal history, demanding nearly $9 billion for construction of controversial Mexico border wall. Now to Israeli election issues, and just where do Israeli political parties stand on the question of what to do with the West Bank? Well, there's something for everyone in the political market of ideas, and our correspondent Eilon Levy brings this report from a debate between the extremes.
Left and right, a world apart, two dramatically different worldviews at this Geneva Initiative debate about what Israel should do with the West Bank. The left says Israel must fully withdraw and create a Palestinian state for the sake of peace.
We think that the occupation is very bad for the Israeli society. We think that you cannot, just take a magic stick and just make all the 2.8 million Palestinians disappear from our land. We can sit tomorrow to the table, open the maps. We know more or less what the agreement is going to look like.
The left-wing Labour Party is not talking about peace, but says a withdrawal will guarantee Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state.
Let me tell you a secret. We too would be very happy to remain in all parts of the land. But when we make a choice between losing the state of Israel and preserving it, we need to separate. We need to draw a border between us and them.
The right insists it's time to annex the territories to guarantee Israel's security.
Our view is that instead of giving territory and legitimacy to the PLO, we have to take the territory we need in order to ensure our long-term security. And that means applying Israeli law to Area C, and that means ending the legitimization of the PLO as a partner for peace.
The representatives of the parties vying to lead the government dropped out at the last minute. In contrast to Meretz and the New Right, Blue and White and the Likud are trying not to make this election about the Palestinians. Blue and White's platform doesn't mention a Palestinian state, but they call for a regional conference for Israel to separate from the Palestinians and retain full security control. The Likud party is against any Palestinian state, and almost all lawmakers want to annex the territories. But if the question of the territories once brought Israeli masses to the streets, no longer. This election is about Netanyahu, and a sensible debate on policy might have to wait. Eilon Levy, I24 News.
The definition of anti-Semitism continues to spark a fierce debate around a key question. Where's the line between legitimate criticism of the state of Israel and anti-Semitism? On the weekend, US President Donald Trump told Republican donors that he doesn't know how any Jew could vote for a Democrat these days, given the party's stance on several issues, including recent comments by Representative Ilhan Omar. Our correspondent Tal Heinrich spoke exclusively to Ilan Carr, the US Special Envoy dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism, during an American Zionist movement event.
The debate over anti-Semitism has become intense both in the US and across Europe. Countries like Germany, the UK and France have reported an increase in anti-Semitic incidents in 2018. Ilan Carr was appointed in February by President Trump and Secretary Mike Pompeo to serve as the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. He told I24 News that the uptick in violence against Jews can be partly attributed to the success of the State of Israel.
Israel has become a very successful country, and you've got populations that have been agitating against Israel.
While there is no question over anti-Semitism when it appears as violence, other forms of hatred and discrimination against Jews are more debatable, as they are often claimed to be part of criticism against the Jewish state.
The delegitimization, the demonization, or the application of double standards to the State of Israel is anti-Semitism.
Ambassador Dani Dayan, Israel's consul general to New York, says any form of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism is a problem.
Deny the Jewish people the right to self-determination, even if it's not motivated by hatred of Jews, is evil, is bad, and should be condemned.
So what is the U.S. State Department's strategy to tackle anti-Semitism? Carl lays out 3 key principles: not ignoring anti-Semitic ideology from any region, calling out the enemies of the Jewish people, empowering U.S. friends who fight anti-Semitism. He believes the fight against anti-Semitism would be more effective if the Jewish community speaks in one voice about what anti-Semitism is. Tal Heinrich, I-24 News.
And that is all we have time for this edition of I-24 News. But we will continue to keep you updated on all of those breaking stories, including the clashes erupting outside the Temple Mount in East Jerusalem. So do stay with us online, i24news.tv. And we have all of those breaking stories on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and of course on Twitter. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.